Everyone. It looks like it's 9 o'clock, so we can get started. Thank you all for joining us today. My name is Jana Farley, and I'm the Communications Director for the ACLU of North Dakota. Just a couple quick housekeeping items. We are recording this press conference today, and when you're not talking, please mute your phones. It'll just make it easier for everyone to hear each other. So let's get started. As you all know, good health starts with stable housing, and that's why we're here today. But for North Dakotans whose income has been impacted because of involuntary unemployment, extended sickness, or required quarantine during the COVID-19 crisis, stable housing is a major concern. In fact, nearly 1/3 of respondents to the North Dakota Department of Commerce COVID-19 Community Impact Survey released last week said they have concerns about housing evictions. So if Governor Burgum's not going to issue a temporary eviction moratorium, he needs to do something to protect North Dakota renters who are involuntarily out of work. Prohibiting late fees and dings to people's credit would make it a lot easier for North Dakota renters to get back on their feet when the economy rebounds. So today, Cody Schuler from the Fargo-Moorhead Coalition to End Homelessness, Michelle Ridds from High Plains Fair Housing, and Dane DeCray from the ACLU of North Dakota will be making some brief statements, and then we'll open it up for questions. So let's get started. Dane, take it away.
Thanks, Jana, and thank you everybody for attending today's press conference. I would be remiss not to note the Dean of the North Dakota Press Corps, Dave Thompson, is here on the line. I appreciate seeing you, Mr. Thompson. So as Jana indicated, we've been advocating for a temporary eviction moratorium for a little over a month. And to date, Governor Burgum hasn't heeded our call. And in fact, just yesterday, I sent an email to Governor Burgum privately in an attempt to find some common ground on the issue. But I didn't hear back. And while this is disappointing, it's actually helped us reflect and take stock of why we started this advocacy campaign. And that was for 3 reasons. 1, we want to keep people in their homes. 2, we want to prevent people from getting late fees if they get behind on their rent. And 3, we want to prevent people from getting credit dings if they get behind on their rent. So to date, we haven't seen that many people having to leave their homes. And this could be why we haven't seen the governor move on this issue. However, we are still concerned about late fees and credit dings, especially given Governor Burgum's proposed solution to this problem. That solution is to work with your landlord and wait for your stimulus money to arrive. Now, while we see a few problems with this solution, one jumps out at us the most, and that's the possibility of people being charged late fees and getting hit with credit dings while they're waiting. We don't think that's right. We don't think people should be penalized for doing what Governor Burgum has told them to do. And so that's why we called today's press conference. While we still believe the best solution to this problem is to issue a temporary eviction moratorium, if Governor Burgum won't do that, then at a minimum, he needs to cancel all late fees and credit dings that have accrued or may accrue during the COVID-19 crisis. Simply put, people shouldn't be penalized for doing what Governor Burgum has asked them to do. Now, I've said in every interview since beginning this campaign that this has never been about taking on the governor. And today's call for a scaled back executive order is proof. We simply want people to remain in their homes and not be charged late fees and have their credit ruined because of COVID-19. This is a reasonable middle ground, and we're asking Governor Burgum to act. Thank you.
Cody, I think you're next. Take it away.
All right. Oh, thanks, Jana. So I'm Cody Schuler. I'm the director, as Jana said, of the FM Coalition to End Homelessness, and I echo Dane's sentiments. Today, as we continue to advocate for those in crisis or living with heightened anxiety about their housing situation, we are calling on Governor Burgum to take action. So over a month ago, as Dane mentioned, we joined together advocating for families and individuals across our state who are just one late payment or one lost paycheck away from homelessness. We're continuing to advocate for those who are hit hard by COVID-19 crisis, particularly those who are the most vulnerable. Unemployment and federal relief dollars are helping people. But what about those people who were struggling or on the verge of losing their housing before this crisis began? For those already behind, for those already struggling, this crisis has just amplified their struggle. The moratorium on eviction hearings by the state Supreme Court gave a brief moment of certainty in these most uncertain times. But since that has ended, and the coming weeks and the months are going to show us that those who have been behind will start to see their evictions move forward. Fees on late rent are accumulating, and payments are snowballing, or fees are snowballing on those payments, or those late payments. Those things are being reported to those credit agencies, as Dane mentioned. While many landlords are willing to work with their tenants, not all are willing. And stable and secure housing during a global pandemic should not hinge upon the benevolence of a landlord. And so today, we are advocating or continuing to advocate for those who are in crisis or living with that heightened anxiety in their housing situation. We continue to ask Governor Burgum to come up with a better solution than just working with landlords. And so we also want to empower renters across North Dakota to know their rights and to advocate for themselves. And so, you know, as each month passes, we're just kicking the can down the road to a future housing crisis. Individuals who have those, you know, eviction moves forward. When you have been evicted, it is harder to seek housing in the future. When you have poor credit, it is challenging to seek housing in the future. And so during this crisis, we really need to protect people who were going to find themselves not only in a housing crisis now, but perpetually into housing crisis because of this time where their records are dinged and now they have a blemished record. So we need to be able to come up with a better solution, and that's why we're continuing to call for that moratorium, but at minimum to be able to really cancel those late fees, please not reporting those things to credit agencies, and to be able to give people the chance that they need. And if for those people out there who are in crisis or concern about the status of their housing, please know your rights. Gain knowledge of what is legal, what the eviction process is, so that you can advocate for yourself. By knowing your rights, you can help keep you and your family safe, socially distanced, and you give yourself the time that you need to seek a solution. And so we're really advocating for both things there, for people to not only know their rights, but also calling on the governor. I do want to make just a short comment before handing off to Michelle, that one of the things that also people have brought to my attention, and we are well aware of the fact that the state has responded with the rent bridge program. So the North Dakota Department of Health has put together what they're calling the COVID-19 Emergency Rent Bridge to provide temporary rent assistance to eligible renters who are experiencing a loss of housing or household income due to COVID-19. Now, this is a welcome resource to help those who have been impacted. It focuses on those whose lives have been disrupted by this pandemic, but so it's a welcome resource, but it also might be too narrow. And so as I understand it, I just want to mention a couple of things. So the program does not cover those with past rent already due. It only is helping sort of current and forward moving hardship. And so if you're already in arrears, you're already facing eviction, if you have any other debt that's amplifying your crisis, you might not be able to qualify for this program. And so that's a barrier that we're concerned about. Also, applicants who have lost their employment due to the mandated closures or social distancing requirements, those folks are qualifying for this program, and that makes sense. But if you were already unemployed when this started, or you're unable to document why you've lost your employment around COVID-19, you might fall through the cracks during this time. And then also, this requires you to scan and upload documents like bank statements and some other documents that will require access to the internet, technology, smartphones, and things. And really the answer that the state has given is that they need to go to agencies in our communities to seek assistance to be able even to apply for this program the state has provided. And many of those agencies, many of them are partners in my organization, are just really unable or are already stretched really thin during this time and may be unable to really help individuals with this. It's a little bit of a burden then on our system. And then lastly, I just want to say that when someone receives approval, their landlord must enroll as a vendor with the state. And so this might not be a problem for very large property management companies, but it might be a hardship for some of those small mom and pop landlords. And so we just have some concerns of how this fits into our existing resources and systems in our local communities. Here in the Fargo community, we have a very robust way of trying to help people who are struggling and need assistance to prevent them from homelessness. And this system, this state program is an excellent resource, but it really stands alone aside from existing work that we're doing. And so we need to figure out how to dovetail it in. And so those are the kinds of things that, while this is a welcome resource, we're not sure that it's really going far enough, because it really does have some gaps and some high barriers. So those are just a few examples that I wanted to lift up before turning things over to Michelle, and looking forward to taking questions from all of you.
Thank you, Cody. All right, Michelle, you're up.
Thanks, Cody. Yeah, I do love. I want to echo the what you said about empowering, and Dane put together a great resource that maybe he can talk about a little bit later that will help tenants understand what their rights are. But as you know, I am Michelle, the Executive Director of High Plains Fair Housing Center. Fair housing is a right protected by federal and state laws. It means that you can freely choose a place to live without regard to race, color, religion, sex, national origin, because you're disabled, have children in your family, or because you're on public assistance. We run a hotline, and in the last month, we've seen an increase of calls relating to housing discrimination in the era of COVID-19. Because COVID-19 is so new, this is an evolving area in housing discrimination. A person may be discriminated against in violation of the Act if they're denied housing for having a record of contracting COVID-19 or being regarded as having COVID-19. For example, in other parts of the country, we have heard that property managers unlawfully seek to evict or refuse housing to healthcare workers merely because of unsupported fears that the worker may have been exposed or contracted the virus. Closer to home here in North Dakota, we received a call from a gentleman who was denied rental housing because he worked at a big box store. And the property manager did not want to meet him and sign the lease or have him in the building for fear that he carried the disease, the virus. Another man called us just the other day from Fargo. His property manager threatened to fine him if he went outside of his apartment because the property manager heard that his roommate's girlfriend contracted COVID-19, even though neither the roommate or his girlfriend were living at the address while she recuperated. Finally, people with underlying health conditions are calling our hotline with concerns about property managers, maintenance, and landlords being allowed entrance into their homes. Some are requesting a reasonable accommodation that they be allowed to leave their lease early without penalty, to move in with family or a smaller building to minimize their exposure to the virus. Since the massive layoffs began, people started to call High Plains Fair Housing concerned about the stability of their homes and their housing. Evictions are happening all over the state. As early as last week, shortly after the North Dakota Supreme Court lifted the eviction freeze, there were 2 scheduled in Grand Forks. It was telecourt over the internet. Some landlords are working with tenants. As Dane said, some landlords, because of the types of mortgages that they hold, are covered by federal moratorium, but many are not, causing a hodgepodge of protections and unnecessary stress for North Dakotans as they are forced to maneuver complicated program rules. Renters will never get ahead if they're charged late fees or their credit ratings are impacted because of the pandemic. We know that the late fees are being charged because people are telling us that they're being charged when they call our hotline. We need a plan for North Dakota to move forward, and we do ask Governor Burgum to create a coherent policy to make it easier for all North Dakota renters to become financially stable during this pandemic and then once this pandemic is over. We haven't seen the reporting yet of credit ratings, but we can imagine if people are being charged late fees, if people are being evicted, that's just around the corner. So thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. And now we will open it up for questions. Ask away.
All right, Dave Thompson here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, very good. Just to follow up on that last point about the credit ratings, has there been any talk about going to the credit rating agencies and asking for some kind of COVID relief, something like that? I was just curious.
No, there hasn't been. We wanted to give the governor an opportunity to do a North Dakota state solution. But again, going back to our 3 goals, if that doesn't come to fruition, that's an absolutely good idea for us to evaluate, because we are focused entirely on solutions.
And then to follow up, Dane, what you said, you have been trying to contact the governor and getting no response from the Burgum administration on this?
I contacted the governor yesterday with an update of what we plan to do today to hopefully come together and be able to have a different flavor of this press conference to announce that we were going to be working together on this scaled down executive order. And I know the governor is very busy, so I don't mean it as a gotcha that he didn't respond in one day, but I did want to make note that we have been trying, and that reason is because this is not meant to be adversarial. This is entirely meant to help these North Dakota folks who are struggling, and we all deserve to help them.
Michelle, you also mentioned that the number of complaints about housing discrimination has gone up since COVID-19. Do you have a rough estimate about how many complaints you received?
Right. So overall, our calls have gone up because it's a discrimination hotline, because it deals with housing and it's really the only housing hotline. Our calls are, kind of 3 times as many. In terms of the fair housing complaints, I'd say since this started, obviously, we've probably gotten about 8 or 9 calls that are related to the pandemic, and people, again, who, a lot of concern about, landlords showing units. There was a woman who's renting a house, and that house was for sale, and so the owner just kept on without much notice, coming in. So she was worried about her health. She was worried about her children's health, and not getting enough notice. So yeah, there's a lot of calls.
Michelle, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, you said 8 or 9 calls related to the pandemic. Is that correct?
Yes.
Now, is it possible that the word has not gone out far enough yet? I mean, I know of at least that many cases of people who are struggling right now, and probably even more. There's one guy I've just talked to this morning who is disabled. He's going to be evicted probably on May 26th when he's got his court appearance, the teleconference, for a reason that he didn't think he should be culpable for. But do you have your finger on the bigger picture? I mean, is this a lot bigger than 8 or 9 calls, or?
Yeah, I would definitely think it's bigger than 8 or 9 calls. I think people are not quite putting together discrimination and the issues. So I mean, for people to call us, to find it and then to reach out and call, I think that it's much bigger. And thank you. It reminds me to get the word out more.
And I'd like to echo that as well. One of the things that we've struggled with is finding people willing to tell these stories publicly. And we've been doing that for a month. And time and again, we hear from the governor and other folks that, we're just not hearing it. We haven't heard this. And I know that you've done a lot of great reporting for the Forum and the High Plains Reader. And I can tell you that we've heard a lot more stories. But when we get to the final request to have it go public, people are scared. This is a scary time generally, but in a state with not as many protections for individuals as perhaps some of our neighbors, people just don't want to go out on that ledge. I mean, they're already wondering if they're going to be in their home next month. Do they really want to rock the boat and maybe increase that to next week? And that's especially true now that these eviction hearings are back online. And so I push back against that. And I know you're not saying that, but I push back against that when people tell me, well, give me the data, give me the facts, because we hear a consistent drumbeat, but we, don't know where to send them. And I think that's part of what Michelle and Cody talk about. there's not a clear directive in North Dakota that says, if you're having housing issues, here is who you talk to. Here is who has the resources. Here is a person who can tell you what to do. So we've tried to fill this gap, and we've made our Know Your Rights literature, and we send people to Michelle, Cody, anybody. But I do think we could do more in this moment to try to find a central repository to help people, because for every one person who can find Michelle's group, Cody's group, my organization, 2 or 3 are not and are just giving up on the process. So these numbers are low. I'm confident of it.
Yeah, and I should say, I was talking specifically about discrimination related to the pandemic calls. In a sense, you know, if we want to just talk about in general, the housing calls that we've received, it's probably been, you know, close to 100 calls, you know, so we're getting a lot of calls. When you know, kind of drill down, we get just regular discrimination calls, but when you focus specifically on, you know, the pandemic. And I think it's exactly what you said, you know, it's so new, it's evolving, people don't really understand, they're not connecting it, right? So, and then there's a lot of people out there who don't know who to call or have resources to call.
A follow-up question to that. You know, there's a lot of people right now who are facing these issues. I don't know if they realize or not, or why they're unwilling to speak up, because it's no fault of their own. They didn't create the pandemic. They didn't create COVID-19 or the coronavirus. What message can you give to them to say, stand up and come out and let us know and we can help you, or whatever message you want to say there? Just for anybody wants to answer that.
Cody, you want to answer that and I can follow up too?
Yeah, I'm sorry. My internet cut out there for a second. Chris, can you repeat the question?
Yep. Hey, hello. Yeah. Yeah. Just there's a lot of people out there who, my impression, although some that are willing to stand up and speak out, and some who have spoken out and have gotten targeted by their landlords afterward. But you know, there's not their fault. It's not these people did not create this coronavirus or create this pandemic. What can you say to them to encourage them to be able to not be afraid to speak up?
Well, first of all, I'd say, I mean, I think that that it, especially for those, and again, you know, I really want to speak to those who are on the margins, those folks who are the most vulnerable in our society, that oftentimes they don't know how to advocate for themselves, or that isn't a safe thing to be able to do. And so to be able to reach out to places that might be able to help them, for instance, like Michelle's organization, like some of the partners in my organization, and that would be statewide. We have homeless service providers, community action partnerships, et cetera, who offer assistance in each community, and oftentimes are able to connect people with safer ways to speak up. I would also say to the press that, you know, when meeting those individuals who might not want to, I mean, to be generous with them about anonymity or different ways in which their identity can be protected, and assuring them of that, or telling stories in ways in which it's effective to tell the story, but you're not able to trace back, well, that must be that landlord, and that landlord has 10 units, so we can figure out who it was. I think that there needs to be we all need to work together on that. And so it's scary to advocate for oneself. I've talked to a number of individuals who have told me some frightening stories, but as Dane had mentioned, just, you know, aren't willing to tell that story. Or it's also a moment of pride. I mean, as Dane said, I mean, this is a scary time in which we don't know what comes next. And so when you, even if you're willing to advocate for yourself, what does that mean that you've now put your name out there for a lot of different reasons? So yeah, Dane, what would you add?
I would add 2 things. I would add that some people maybe don't know that there are other people in the very same shoes as them. And there is a tipping point of power where when enough stories come together, you lose some of that fear of the backlash. And so I would encourage people to know that there are very more people out there just like you. We would love to hear from you. We will help you navigate the process of telling your story. We would love to have as many as possible, because the more stories we have, the more power we have as a community. But more importantly, I think this is a great opportunity for the reason why we need the governor to step into this space. A statement from the governor saying, I want to hear your stories, I want to know how you are doing, and there will nothing negative come from that, would be a monumental moment in leadership by the governor. I think hearing that from the highest elected official in the state can give people that courage to come forward. And I think it also is going to convince landlords and other people that we're not going to retaliate or take those negative actions. So even if Governor Burgum doesn't ultimately follow through on our requests, I think as the leader of the North Dakota people, he deserves to speak to them and tell them it's okay to come forward with this because it isn't your fault. It's nobody's fault. We've never blamed anybody for this crisis. And so these folks, just like everybody else who's asking for some help, deserve to have the same protections and empathy from the governor.
Does anyone have any additional questions?
I got a question kind of related to this, but it's teleconferencing for the courts has started, I guess. Have you guys heard anything about how that's going? Is it the same kind of situation as it was before the pandemic?
Michelle will know probably more about me than this. Do you have anything there, Michelle?
No, I just know that they're scheduled, but I don't know how they've been going.
The one thing I can add, and this is part of our Know Your Rights campaign that we've launched, and we're going to have Jana send our materials related to that after the call. But the one thing I know is that while hearings are back online, the timing of them has been delayed to take into consideration the pandemic. Again, that's not exactly set in stone. I think the numbers are between 3 and 45 days. But I think the one thing that we would want North Dakota renters to know, and this is kind of a common misconception in this odd phrasing in the law, but if you get a 3-day notice for eviction, that doesn't actually mean you have to be out of your home in 3 days. And a lot of people mistake that. And so they see an eviction notice, which is posted perhaps because they're late on rent, and they think, oh geez, I have to be out of my place in 3 days. That's not true at all. All that does is start the eviction process. And so part of our campaign is to let people know that you shouldn't leave if you get that eviction notice. You should, at a minimum, talk to your landlord, like Governor Burgum has said, and see if you can work around that while your stimulus money comes. Or you should ask for your hearing, which could be 3 to 45 days, and postpone that action to hopefully get your money. Essentially what we're saying is, if the governor says to wait for your money, then people need to know they can wait, and that these evictions, these soft evictions, aren't actually evictions, and folks have the right to absolutely wait. So there's more on that as well. If anyone would like to follow up with me or Michelle afterwards to talk about that, we're happy to. I don't want to belabor that point, but feel free to look through our Know Your Rights campaign. And the ultimate goal there is to get that disseminated to as many people in North Dakota who need to know that. We have limited circles. That's why we call press conferences like these. We know that the media and all of us should do our part to try to help navigate the waters of this crisis. And one of those is knowing exactly the rights you have as a renter. So any and all help with that would be greatly appreciated by all of our organizations.
And I just want to piggyback on that, Dane, related but slightly adjacent, is that as I mentioned, I mean, we're looking at possibly just kicking the can down the road. We'd like to be proactive and to see people to be able to stay housed, not just for health and safety now during this time, but also for that long run. And we just, those of us in the homeless services are really concerned that, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 a year from now, down the road, we're going to see new instances of homelessness that are related to this. And so what can we do early on rather than being reactive, possibly costing us more money if we are able to figure out what kind of assistance can be given to folks on the far end? How can we keep that now? So, it is known, I've said it many times, that we on an average day, particularly in Cass County, but I know this is true in the state, that the resources we have to help people stay in their homes, or those who are already experiencing crisis and struggle, is small. We're only able to help about a quarter of the people in the first place. And so with this amplified and growing down the road, we're not going to be able to handle that extra need for assistance, or even just the work that goes with helping those people navigate local systems, whether that's from your local community action, whether those are state dollars, private dollars, a church that is helping people out. You know, we don't want to overwhelm that system long term. And so I think it's really important for folks now, not only advocate for yourselves, but also to reach out and find out what your options are. Every community in North Dakota has a different way in which you receive assistance. We have a coordinated system in Fargo that might look different in Bismarck or Williston. So find out what your resources are to get help now or in the future. Again, this rent bridge program, welcome, very, very helpful, but it doesn't really speak to all of the needs out there, particularly those who were struggling before this started to happen. And so those individuals still need to be reaching out and looking for what they can do. Again, trying to get ahead of the game. One of the primary ways in which we're not able to help people during our normal times is because they wait too long. And so when you come and you're 4 or 5 months behind on rent, and your landlord has been benevolent and let you stay there, and now you're so far behind, there isn't enough assistance dollars to get you caught up. We don't want that to happen. We want people to seek assistance immediately when they need it. Don't be scared to step forward and ask for help. Reach out to those resources in your community. So like I said, sort of a little side tangent, but just really important to remember that people were struggling before this started to happen. And those are the people who are really going to fall through the cracks in particularly the response that's been put forward. Again, a welcome response, but doesn't quite go far enough with some of those things as I understand them.
One more quick question, sorry. History repeats itself, as we all know, I think. Do you see that right now what we're going through could rival or is comparable to what happened in the basically 100 years ago during the Great Depression?
From a housing standpoint, yes and no. So the first thing is to understand that, you know, when in the 1930s and when we had the Great Depression and a number of other moments in history where major national events have caused homelessness, those were there was a specific reason, and we were able to respond to those over time. The economy recovers, et cetera. The problem is since the 1980s, homelessness has become a systemic problem in our country. And so you can attribute it to a lot of different things, and that's like, I teach a whole workshop on that. We could that's a different conversation for a different day. But I mean, people aren't just falling into homelessness like, oh, this is just it's a short-term thing because of this situation, and you have that potential to become homeless. The fact it's not like a flood or something, because if you are already living on the margins, or if you already are in crisis, or even if this, depending how long this crisis goes, you then enter into what's become a systemic issue. You know, we have homelessness has been on the rise. 500,000 people every day experience homelessness in our country before COVID-19, and so there's a long-term problem that's now decades old, and systemic issues that go into the affordable housing and all sorts of things. So it's so multi-layered, and so it's much more complex than just, say, the Depression, or after the Civil War, for instance, there was a lot of homelessness in America and we rebounded because there was a reason or a crisis that caused it. This difference is that this crisis now might be causing homelessness in a time in which it's already an epidemic. So just compounding.
Further questions? I know we all hate this awkward silence with no questions, right?
No, I'm very good. Thank you very much.
All right, if there are no further questions right now, we can wrap it up for today. But do know you can always contact me, and I can get you in touch with Dane, Michelle, or Cody. Again, it's Jana Farley, and my email address is jfarley, JFARLEY, @aclu.org. I will also be sending out a link to the video of the press conference if there's anything anyone needs to refer to later. And I will send out our one-pager Know Your Rights sheet on just what renters should know if they're facing an eviction that Dane and Cody had referenced. So, like I said, if there are no other questions, we will wrap this up for today. Thank you all for joining us. We appreciate it. Have a great day.